Why do I have a pond in one of the sunniest, nicest spots in my garden? I should have a garden there. And I had this spot over here, which things would grow here, but they never grew well. Then I thought, well, maybe this is a good place for a pond because it'll be filling up with water no problem all the time. Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I thought I'd do a short overview of where I am with the major pond project that I started on fall of this year. How far I am with it, I'm sort of, I can't really take it any further because everything's starting to freeze up, but I'll show you where I am and sort of walk through every little aspect of that, try to answer questions people might have. Okay, let's go. Last spring, I built a pond right here. I dug a hole, maybe 7 feet wide, about 6 feet deep at its deepest. I put some minnows in there, and they're, you know, basically functioning pond here. But over the course of the growing season, I just thought, like, why do I have a pond in one of the sunniest, nicest spots in my garden? I should have a garden there. And I had this spot over here up against this fence. That direction's west, which things would grow here, but they never grew well because they basically got about 3 hours less of light than the rest of the garden. And it's not, you can tell today where I live, it's not the sunniest place. To have success with a garden here, this part of Nova Scotia where I live, every bed needs all the sun it can possibly get. So then I thought, also, this bed was always kind of soupy. Water comes down the hill, gathers here. So there was only so many things I could grow here. I needed things that didn't need a lot of light and, you know, didn't mind too much water. Right? Then I thought, well, maybe this is a good place for a pond because it'll be filling up with water no problem all the time, and it's kind of useless as a garden anyway. So I hired a couple young men from down the street, and I was going to get a guy with a tractor to come in and do this, but then I realized I think I could give those two guys some work, and you know, with a tractor I'd have to rip my fence down, and you know, it would just sort of tear the garden up to have a tractor in here. Would have been done in about 2 hours, but and we probably could have made it bigger, right? But I think this will be all right. If it turns out that this wasn't big enough, I'll make it bigger next fall. So we went down at least 6 feet, right? It's deeper than it looks, so the water continues, it goes down deep. And we might even go down deeper, but I'm kind of done working on this for this year because everything's starting to freeze. We took all the good soil from the top. We just distributed that to any bed in the garden that seemed to need a little more soil. Once we got down into the clay and the rocks and all that sort of stuff, we used all that to fill in the old pond. And we brought it all over here next to the old pond, right? This is the old pond here. The goldfish are still in it. They're doing great. They're actually, I don't know if you can see them, I can, but there's such a reflection coming off the ice. But I can see them down there under the ice. I don't know if you can see that or not. A little hint of orange. I don't know what they're called, goldfish. They're orange fish. Anyway, I'm going to let them spend the winter here just because the other pond isn't ready yet. This pond has aquatic vegetation. It's got aquatic life. It's got things for them to eat. They'll be fine. I know there's all kinds of people that say you need a pump, they need air, da 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 da. No, they don't. They're fine. This is a natural pond. This has no pond liner. There's always enough air. The fish always do fine. These fish have been here for a number of years. I just let it freeze over and I don't do anything, and they're fine. Maybe one of them dies every year, but honestly I think it's from natural causes. Right? So everything works out fine here. Fish don't breathe air. They breathe oxygen that's in water, right? And where I live, we get melts and thaws all winter long. Things freeze up, then things thaw, then they freeze, then they thaw, then they freeze, then they thaw. Water, new water is constantly, this is a low point in the landscape. New water, it's constantly going into this pond. That new water has oxygen in it. Plants, or the fish, get their air from that water. They do fine. right? So you don't need an air pump, you don't need nothing with this kind of system where it's just a hole in the ground. And there's aquatic plants, right, underground. To some extent, they replenish the oxygen in the water. A number of different ones, right? And just wild things. Everything here is wild, right? Except for what's it called? Hogwort? I think it's called hornwort. Hogwart's the Harry Potter school. Hornwort is this sort of seaweed-like thing you can buy in a pet store, and it's pretty tough. I don't know if it'll survive the winter, but it's relatively inexpensive to buy if you buy it once a year. And it just grows and grows and grows and creates all this kind of seaweed, and it just uses up all the nutrients from the fish. That's a great thing to throw in a natural pond. Anyway, the plan is next spring, once I get the other pond sort of stabilized, the water clears, I got some aquatic vegetation growing and some things like that, I'll take all these fish, move them over, and I'll fill this in, right? So it's not a mosquito haven. So over here, doesn't look like a lot of water right now, but that's mainly because after the last really, really good rain we had, I drained it. I used a siphon and I drained all the water out down the hill because I wanted to work on it. And what I actually did that day, because there was so much mud and clay and stuff in the pond, was I took a couple bags of ready mix. It's like, it's not cement, it's cement, all-in-one cement mix. I threw a couple of bags of ready mix in the hole, just used the hole as a cement mixer, and I shoveled that all up here, and using a trowel I shaped this sort of wall. And my long-term plan is to continue to do something like that. What I plan to do, but it's just too cold. I mean, and even this didn't set. I don't think there was enough. There was just too much clay. I mean, you're not supposed to mix things in with ready mix, right? You're supposed to just use it as is. And I was just being cheap. What I should have done was thrown Portland cement in with the clay. But I thought if I got it just right and it was warm enough and there was enough wind and all that sort of stuff, that it would make something like, it doesn't have to be, I mean, I'm not building a house here, right? Just something that weeds can't grow in, and something that provides a kind of barrier. And my long-term plan, and I was kind of playing around that day, this was just, I did this on a whim. It took about an hour and a half to do this, okay? So it wasn't a big deal. And if it doesn't cure and it doesn't harden over the winter months, that's fine. Like, it just ends up being clay. I'll break it up and reuse it. What I plan to do is put chicken wire against the ground all along this side, right? I'm gonna leave that wild. That'll all just be weeds and stuff. But this side I plan to do chicken wire, and using cement, trowel it into the chicken wire, right? And just make a kind of, it's not gonna be perfect and it's gonna crack and it's not gonna be 100%, but some kind of waterproof barrier, water and weed proof barrier to some extent, right? To hold the water in, right? So the water will come down the hill, it'll fill up. So the last time I drained this, the water was, I got an outlet pipe right here, and the water was running into this pipe. So it was 2 feet higher than it is right now, right? And it just filled, you know, like it was empty the night before. We had a really good rain and it was full. That was the last serious rain we had, which was less than a week ago, right? Well, it was about a week ago, give or take. So anyway, I know that this is at the right height. So the water was right to here, right? All the way around. So it filled right up, right? So I know I'll have zones that are shallow and there's a hole there that's quite deep. This rock, this is an enormous rock, was right in the center of the hole, right? It took me and 2 other guys with pry bars and physics. We basically rolled it over to here. Right? And I plan to have some sort of solar fountain. I've got an idea in my head of how this is all going to work, but a solar fountain that'll take water from the pond and distribute it up here, and it'll trickle down over the rocks back in. So there'll be some flow, right? I mean, whenever we have a good rain, of course there'll be flow, so it won't be completely stagnant, right? There'll be fish in there moving around. There'll be all kinds of insects and different kinds of amphibians, frogs and stuff, everything moving around. That keeps the water moving. But also anytime it's sunny, I'll have a solar pump that pumps the water and it just moves around. So, you know, there's always some water movement. Okay. But yeah, the plan is to, using cement, using the natural clay, kind of just trowel type thing, and see how that works. Just play with that. Just playing around with this, like, yeah, it took like, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half to make this here thing. It wasn't hard to do, right? And it didn't take a lot of time. So it's, to me, worth playing with, right? Anything like that, you can always take it apart and redo it. Not a big deal, right? Further plan, and I have to get some aquatic life in here. I have to get, I think I'll use the same approach that I did with the other pond, where I'll just go down. There's a wild, ditchy pond type area near my house. I'll just go down there, get some plants from there, but also just get, sort of kick up the bottom of the, get some of the muddy water from that ditch pond, which is, because this is basically a ditch pond. It's a ditch, right? So I'll get some of the water and some of that, all the stuff that's in the ditch pond, and just throw it in this pond, because there's millions of different kinds of pond ditch seeds in that water. Because the pond I grew last year, I mean, by the end of the season, the thing was just a completely functioning ecosystem in terms of plant life, right? There was plants that grew up the bank. There was plants that grew sort of near where it floods sometimes, and there was plants that grew up and out of the water, like cattails, right? There was every kind of aquatic plant relative to its needs for water, either being constantly submerged or occasionally submerged or on the edge. All those things just started growing. All those things just happened, mainly because I just brought in all this stuff from a natural pond and just dumped it in. Just, a couple bucketfuls of dirty, muddy water from the natural pond ditch type system. All the things that are needed, right, seem to be in there, because it all just kind of happened on its own. It all worked out fine. And I had frogs and water skippers. Everything just happened. Snakes, everything just showed up in a relatively quick amount of time. And I expect that to be even more the case here, because it backs against this sort of wild-ish area. There's a bit more shade here. It's not as exposed. It's kind of a safer place. So I expect things to work out pretty good. One more thing I plan to do is I want to get some gravel and put some kind of French drain type system all along, because see, the water comes down the hill, right? Water comes down the hill, and it does, you can see after a really good rain, all the sand along here is kind of glistening because the water is coming down the hill, which means there's water here. So it makes sense to put some sort of ditch, French drain type thing, just gravel and maybe some big old pipe, that sort of perforated pipe stuff. Have that come along and run into the pond, so that whenever we have a good rain, there's just that much more water running through the system, right? This pipe that goes out, it goes over through here. There's a ditch along here. It's all gravel, and there's big old, that perforated pipe running all the way down. And so that's where the water goes. My initial idea was to have the pond be bigger and go further along this way, and have a ditch going out underneath the fence over there. But just as we worked on the project, it's like, geez, I got a ditch over here anyway, so why don't I just tie this into it and have it work that way? I think it'll be fine. If it isn't, I can always get the pickaxe out and redo the work. But yeah, we got a nice pond. I'd say this is 15 feet by 6 by 6. It's 15 feet wide, 15 feet long, 6 feet wide, and at least 6 feet deep. I can't go much further this way, right, because it will risk the integrity of the fence, right? So that's just gonna have to be the way it is. But yeah, I think we got a nice thing here. I think it's gonna work out great. I'm really happy, and I can't wait to get it all working good, get the fish in here, and have this sort of nice water source, right? Because one of the main reasons you have a pond, I mean, this is a part of the garden that always fills up with, it's always soupy anyway, so I have this nice water source instead of having to use my hoses from the house. I'm using well water. Not a problem with any, I got no problem with any of that, But the pond water is better because it's got all the fish poop in it, and you know, it's just easy to get at. So anyway, that's where that all is. That's where the whole thing ended up. I thought of filming the different days we were out here working, but it's just two guys digging a hole. Right? And I didn't want to bother them with filming and that sort of thing. So I think there's really not much story to be told there, other than I came out here with a couple guys, we moved rocks around and dug a hole. A big hole. But I should say that, in terms of what I paid, right, I think all in I paid those two guys about 300 bucks, right? That's around that, 300 bucks, right? I paid them $15 an hour, and every Sunday they came over and worked for about 2 hours. It's hard work digging a hole, right? And that's really, I was out here working with them, and that's all I wanted to do. Right? Anyway, I don't know if you could get a liner for a pond this size for that much money. Certainly to have a guy come in with a tractor, it would cost at least that much. And because I had just people with shovels, it could be sort of customized. I could change my mind. I could sort of tinker with it, of course. And also they were like a 16-year-old and a 19-year-old, so they were asking me questions about gardening. So I got to, meet my neighbors, meet one of my neighbor's kids, sort of thing. I got to social interaction, right? They were asking, and one of them is, they're both interested in this sort of thing, so I get to talk about that. So that was wonderful. Very customized. So I'm perfectly happy. And for people that ask about the whole liner thing, at least where I live, I mean, it's different for every place, right? But where I live, there's just an incredible amount of clay in the ground. You just don't need a liner. I mean, the only reason you might want a liner is if you want to have the pond have really high water levels, right? Because the deeper you go, the more clay there is, right? So when the pond fills right up to the top, the first foot, it always disappears very quickly, right? Usually the first couple feet of the pond drain out because there just isn't much clay there. There's things you can do to remedy that, right? So with a liner, that water wouldn't drain, the water wouldn't seep out through the sides to the same extent, right? But the advantage of not having a liner is I think there's greater air exchange between the pond, the subsurface soil, right? Like the pond is just water on soil. So I think there's always some degree of air coming out of that. Of course, there's all kinds of different plant life that just easily will grow because it's not a rubber, it's not a big rubber floor. It's actually soil, right? It's, the whole thing functions like a real natural pond because it is, right? So it's way cheaper to not have a liner. And as long as your soil, as long as the ground you've built the pond in has enough of a clay content, and there's things you can do like beating the sides to compact, right? So it holds water better. That helps. You can also do things with various, like when the pond's full, you can put something like gypsum in, and that'll actually bond with the clay and won't create like a cement liner, but think about all the water that's draining into all the little cracks and holes and all the different places in the pond bed. Well, all that stuff just goes into those cracks and gums it up a little bit, so it will hold water a bit better. It won't hold it perfectly. You're not making a swimming pool, but yeah, I think the system works fine, and it certainly costs a lot less than a liner. And you don't. And one of the other advantages is it can literally, like my other pond, the other pond where the fish are right now, I didn't pay anyone to help me with that. I just, I made a small pond one year, I made it bigger the next year, I made it bigger the next year. Over the course of 3 years, I made it a fairly large pond. I did that all myself, right? The only reason I hired a couple guys to do it this year is because I wanted it done quickly. I had a lot of things on the go during that time of the year, so I didn't want to be exhausted, and I'm older, right? When I made that pond, I was 5 years younger, which 5 years doesn't sound a lot, but 45 and 50, I'm 50 now. 45 and 50 ain't the same thing. So I still could have done this all myself, but the pace those two young guys were able to keep, I never could have kept that pace. No way, right? So it was great. It was great just giving some work to a couple of young fellas. And it was also humbling, because you realize how old you get when you work with young people, and you realize they're just not the slightest bit worn out the way you are by hard, physical work, which digging a hole in the ground is hard physical work. So this will be the last year these guys spend the winter in this pond. And next spring, at some point, I'll move them to the new pond. You might ask, how am I going to move them? I just use a minnow trap. Take a minnow trap, put some bread in it, stick it in the goldfish pond. They'll all get in there eventually. They can't resist bread, right? So I'll just trap them in a minnow trap, move them to the other pond. Won't be hard to do, right? I'm also going to take all the water. I'm hoping the depth is such that I can siphon some of this water to the other pond, right? Because there's just so much going on in this water. I want whatever's alive. I'm talking about things you can't see, right? This is a successful pond. The fish overwinter in it every year. I never feed them, never do anything. Don't need an air pump, don't do nothing, right? So I want whatever magic's in here in the other pond. Not magic, it's nature, right? It's biology, it's science. But I figure it can't hurt to put some of this in there, right? And any plants that are in here. So all the hornwort that was in my little pond over there, and the stuff that was in here. Right, there's a deeper hole over here, and there's a whole bunch of hornwort in that hole. Now, all summer long, I didn't notice any evidence of the goldfish eating the hornwort. Maybe in the winter when things get desperate, they might start nibbling at it. I have no idea. From everything I've read, the hornwort can survive as long as it doesn't get too cold. So, I tied weights to it and put it down at the bottom, at the deepest part of this pond. So it'll either survive the winter or it will not. But it's a very easy thing to find at any sort of pet store where they sell stuff for goldfish ponds. It's a very common goldfish pond plant because it's so good at cleaning water, right? So, I got at the pet store, I don't know what I spent, like $5, and I got like a small amount, like enough to put in a coffee mug, I guess. And by the end of the summer, I had like a bucket of hornwort in all these different ponds. So it grew well, like the environment. Anyway, so I'll be moving that. And anything that is growing here that seems pond planty that I notice, I'll move that also before I fill it all in. Anyway, I hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching. Hey folks, since so many of my viewers live in the USA, I've found a USA-based seed provider to partner with to help support the channel. Park Seed has been providing seeds to Americans for over 150 years. They have a wide selection for just about everything you need for gardening, from seeds to fruit bushes and trees to garden tools and clothing. To help support my channel, simply go to my website, maritimegardening.com, and click the Park Seed link with the American flag on the right-hand side of the page. The link will take you to their website, and if you buy something after using the link to get there, I get a small commission on the sales. They have a great promotion going right now, which offers 15% off on your first purchase. So maybe check that out and give them a try for your next seed order. As always, thanks for watching. Thanks for everything you do to help grow my channel. We'll see you in the next video. Happy gardening.